Okay, great. Well, we're going to talk about the war on amine oxidation. I'll say something about why and what this war is, something about our recent results at the University of Texas and at launch, and some about future plans and needs. Why this war? Oxidation is a significant environmental and economic risk for deployment of second-generation amine scrubbing. We need to do something about that. I've been working on this for 11 PhD students in series. We've been working on the pizzazz and other second-generation solvents. And in our experience, we're still asking how much of what are we going to produce and release and where? What are its safety and health impacts? And we must understand and mitigate amine oxidation with second-generation amines if we expect to deploy CCS by post-combustion capture. This is an essential need. There are 4 oxidation pathways that need to be mitigated. We need to do a good job of selecting our amines. At the very least, we should have amines that avoid oxidation in the absorber and in the sump of the absorber, where oxidation can occur if you have a poor selection for the amine. We need to remove nitrogen dioxide to avoid as much as 5 to 10 moles of oxidation per mole of NO2 in the absorber itself. We need to remove dissolved oxygen or do something about the mechanism where dissolved oxygen gets carried over into the hot section of the process and reacts there. And then finally, we need to address a shuttle mechanism where ferrous ion is oxidized to ferric in the absorber, gets carried over to the hot parts of the stripper and oxidizes there. And we think this mechanism is what gives that takeoff of oxidation as the solvent further degrades. It's just some thoughts and preliminary data. So we believe we've now shown that piperazine oxidation at least is catalyzed by NO2. What we think happens is NO2 reacts with the piperazine and makes a free radical. That free radical reacts with oxygen to make another free radical. That reacts with piperazine and propagates the reaction. So we have a chain reaction with a termination. In the stripper, any nitrite that's been made in the absorber reacts with secondary amines such as piperazine to make nitrosamines. And in the case of piperazine, where we operate at elevated temperature, that nitrosamine is thermally degraded. The net effect of all this is NO2 reacts not with 1 mole of piperazine, but with 5 to 10 to 20 moles of piperazine to produce oxidation products. And we have data that demonstrates that now. This is our experience with piperazine oxidation in pilot plants with and without NO2. This is the total cumulative degraded nitrogen as a function of hours of operation of the pilot plant. There are 5 pilot plants represented here, actually 4, but 5 sets of data. There are 3 sets of data where campaigns were operated with 1 to 5 ppms of NO2. And in one of these campaigns, we started with basically air free of NOx, and we added 1 ppm of NO2, and you could see the degradation rapidly increased. And then we removed the NO2, and if you use your imagination, you can actually see it dropping off again. But this high rate of oxidation is associated with NO2. We have other campaigns at the Separation Research Program and the National Carbon Capture Center where we had either no NOx or low NO2. And in all those campaigns, we see a moderate rate of degradation, substantially less than with NO2. This general effect has also been observed at TCM with MEA. Whenever they run the RFCC, which has high NOx, they get higher rates of oxidation than when they run the CHP, which has low NOx. And they also have experience with Caesar 1 now with the CHP system. Without the SCR with 2.4 ppms of NO2, they observe greater oxidation with the SCR, where they have about 0.5 ppm of NO2. So NO2 is an important actor. It may be less of an issue with MEA and Caesar 1. Launch results suggest that the addition of 15 parts per million of NO2 in rig testing with MEA shows a small effect. And it could be that primary amines remove less NO2, which reduces the amount of NO2 that's available for catalysis. Launch testing at Niederaussem showed no reduction of oxidation with NO2 removal by sulfite scrubbing. That may be because the NO2 is regenerated by NO oxidation in the duct. However, they did see nitrosamine still accumulating in the salt. We've also worked on dissolved oxygen consumption in launch. This shows data at high temperatures with 5-mol-alpiprazine and MEA. TNO developed a method used at lower temperatures, and we've adapted that method with a 20-second plug flow reactor at stripper temperatures and pressures. So this is the rate constant of oxidation as a function of temperature. At high temperature, it's all gone. There's a really high rate, and these rates probably just represent, hey, it's all gone. At low temperatures, it just doesn't react very fast in 20 seconds. But these data in the middle definitely establish that we have a rate of reaction for piperazine and a rate of reaction for MEA, and the MEA reacts 10 times faster at 100 degrees Celsius. Nitrogen sparging should be able to address this dissolved oxygen issue. We've demonstrated nitrogen sparging in the SRP pilot plant, and DORA has been demonstrated to remove dissolved oxygen as well. And this just shows one set of data where the initial dissolved oxygen without sparging is about 7 parts per million. You turn on the sparger, and you get about 1 part per million of dissolved oxygen. Carbon treating, we've shown in bench scale work, significantly reduces dissolved iron in batch experiments. So this is just iron removal in a simple recirculating absorption system as a function of the adsorbent loading in grams of carbon per gram of solvent with 2 different degraded solvents from the National Carbon Capture Center. And you can see if you use enough carbon, you will in fact remove the dissolved iron. We've also used carbon treating in our bench scale high temperature oxidation reactor. And this shows results where we cycle from 55 to 150 degrees Celsius. This is the normalized piperazine in the reactor as a function of time. With the carbon bed on, the rate at which the piperazine decays is pretty small. As soon as we turn the carbon bed off, the piperazine degrades substantially faster. And then when we turn on nitrogen sparging in that system, you can see a decrease in the rate of degradation of the piperazine. However, it looks like we always take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So you will hear later this afternoon that none of our current understanding appears to help in excellent long-term testing of Caesar-1 at Niederaussem. Sulfite scrubbing removes NO2, but it seems to have no effect on oxidation. Ion exchange removes metals and degradation products, but it seems to have no effect on oxidation. Carbon treating clears the solution, but it seems to have no effect on oxidation. But you'll see that we can definitely conclude from this important work at Niederaussem that Caesar-1 does oxidize slowly, even in the long-term testing. So in this example, solvent selection has worked. Caesar-1 is resistant to oxidation. There are still deep, dangerous pits in our understanding of oxidation, and I'm going to expand on 4 of these. We've done very little work with volatile aldehydes, acetaldehyde, formaldehyde. These are hazardous air pollutants that are regulated in the U.S. We're just starting to understand and report these emissions. There are very few reported solution analyses for these components. There's practically no work on oxidation mechanisms that create these, and we need additional reporting of available data that you have so that we can all gain understanding on where these come from and what we can do about them. We need more information on the health and safety properties of the cats and dogs that we're producing. We all make this degradation product and that degradation product, and frankly, we know very little about the health and safety properties of our degradation products. And of course, the best way to deal with that is just not to make them in the first place, avoid oxidation. Most of us have incomplete solution analyses. There are very few solvents that have comprehensive analytical methods that really measure for everything. We're frequently missing aldehydes, amino acids, alcohols. We must close this material balance. Comprehensive air emission results need to be gathered to part per billion levels. The PTR-TOF-MS method seems to be the best way of doing that. We have a good start of that with data at TCM and a few other pilot plants. We only have started to begin using these methods in the U.S., and we'll be using this in our pilot plant campaign in CCC this year. There are some specific needs for pilot plant testing with second-generation solvents. We need long-term testing with reclaiming. Will it mitigate oxidation by ferrospheric? We have these hypotheses, but we've never actually shown that if you use long-term reclaiming, that we'll be able to avoid oxidation by the shuttle mechanism. We need sustained testing with nitrogen, spargine, or DOR to really determine, well, we can remove the nitrogen, but does it really reduce the oxidation in these systems? And we need more work on NO2, either scrubbing it or injecting it to find out if it really does matter with all second generation solvents, or is it just a problem with solvents such as piperazine? There will be future work funded at the University of Texas after the launch project ends. Will be funded by Texas Carbon Management Program and DOE. We'll continue bench scale work on the effect of NO2 at absorber conditions with multiple solvents. We'll be measuring the dissolved oxygen consumption rate at elevated temperatures with multiple solvents. We'll do cyclic oxidation of piperazine with carbon treating and reclaiming. And we're adding analytical methods for aldehydes and amino acids as we speak. We are running a pilot plant at the National Carbon Capture Center in 2023, where we'll be testing nitrogen sparging, NO2 pre-scrubbing, and carbon treating. And we're open to any and all collaborations. If you want us to work with you on anything proprietary, semi-proprietary, open work, feel free to talk to us about the capabilities that we have. We want you to be part of this war on oxidation so that we can win it. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I think we have 1 minute for some early questions. Because I really want to see the table. If not, I guess then we move over to the presentation of Hannah.
Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Let me put it up.
Okay, then I'm gonna summarize something that normally takes years to do, or at least a year to do, is to qualify a solvent, and I'm gonna summarize it in 10 minutes. So in general, when one is starting to develop solvents, one needs to look into different things. And one has to look into the removal efficiency. You need to look into the environmental impact and the degradation, and you need to look that you can operate it actually in a large scale in a trouble-free manner. When it comes to removal efficiency, what you normally discuss is about the viscosity. It's usually too viscous. You're looking at the mass transfer. I come a little bit back to this, and cyclic capacity. And you're looking at the energy consumption. When I talk about the environment, I'm thinking about safety. I'm thinking about what happens if you get spills, its biodegradability, if it's ecotoxicity, and also a little bit about volatility of the solvent itself. But you also, independently, you have to be able to operate it. So it's important that it's and for the environment, also the chemical stability is important. But it's also important for the trouble-free operation that the chemical is stable. You would like it to be not going. You don't want it to cause a lot of corrosion, and you typically don't want it. Normally, you don't want it to precipitate. So there's a lot of things to look into, and I'm going to look into many of these things a little bit more shortly. If you look at the removal efficiency, so what you normally would say that you want something that reacts super fast with CO2, a solvent, because that will make your absorber to be shorter. You would like to have an equilibrium behavior, heat of reaction, and cyclic capacity properties, so that you have the solvent can carry a lot of CO2 per 1 kilo of the solvent. Heat of reaction, you typically maybe want it to be a bit high so that you get a good change in the VLE behavior, but you can design your system the way you want. But you need certain properties for this. And these properties are important for estimating and finding out about how much energy you need to use to regenerate the solvent. But also they're related to pumping costs. So less capacity you have, the more you have to pump the solvent around in the system. But all these things, these are easy. These are standard things. We have a lot of equipment to do these experiments, and we get a lot of data, and we can design it based on that. Then the question is that it's not always that you need to have everything on the highest, but you need to make your own rules for the fact what is good enough. What is your lower limit for all of this? How slow can it be? How much energy can it be used? And that depends a bit on the case you are working with, but it also depends. There are some general, I mean, you need capacity to carry CO2 per kilo solvent. Independently, you want it to be high, but it doesn't have to be always higher than the previous one, but it just has to be high enough. But these are easy, relatively easy things to do. And there's a lot of experience around these things. But then there are things that often comes a bit later in the solvent development. So this is what you normally start with, these basic experiments. You find solvents that have a good performance and you are very happy. But then there are things that are actually important, but are often taken a bit further in the development. And one of them is related to the solvent vapor pressure and volatility losses. And I think if your solvent has a high vapor pressure, you can deal with it with the process design, but it's still going to cost you something. And you should be aware of it and not just say that, okay, we're going to deal with it. Yes, you can deal with it, but it's going to cost you something. The more volatile it is, the more you need to put money on the solvent emission technologies on the top of the absorber, and you need to also, it will also increase the solvent replacement cost. But you, as I said, you can do something about it. So the volatile emissions like the amines, some degradation products like ammonia, you can control them by making a good design for your water wash sections on top of the absorbers. You can put several of those water wash sections. You can put acid wash at the ends, and you are quite well off. But there is a second challenge, which is related that there potentially is a formation of mist in the absorber itself. And mist is small particles that is following the gas and typically very difficult to control or catch. And since there can be very large amount of these small aerosols, they can actually carry a lot of amine away from the absorber itself. And this is something one should consider and take into account. Because you can't operate with a lot of mist formation. And you have to either deal with it by removing any particles and sulfur before the absorber so that you don't form aerosols, or you minimize it, or you have to have some sort of treatment afterwards that gets rid of these aerosols. You also need to know what happens to your solvent and consider it in the beginning in case you get leakages in a real operational plant. And you have to think about the toxicity. Right here today, I'm just talking about ecotoxicity, but actual toxicity is also important feature for the solvent because of someone has to also use and operate it. There are some standardized tests you can do at least for the aqueous phases. So if you have leakages into the sea or water that you can make, and you can find out if your solvent is biodegradable, if it's what is its ecotoxicity. And the thing is that here you would like your solvents to be degradable. You would like them to degrade in the nature, but actually in the process you would like them to be stable. And maybe the most challenging part when you qualify your solvents is the fact that you need to understand the solvent stability and the corrosion. And here you would normally do different things. So you are always going to need laboratory tests. They can be very simple ones. They can be very simple like oxidative degradation tests or thermal tests, preferably followed by cyclic tests, where you can take into account get more like the process conditions. But you need these tests, all of these, to be able to actually understand what you are for. So the most focus on these tests should always be on the identification of all degradation compounds. Trying to close nitrogen balance. So try to make sure that what you are finding as degradation compounds are actually the main degradation compounds. That you are not missing a large degradation compound amount that is formed a lot, but you have no idea what it is. You should also use this time to identify degradation compounds that are important for the for the safety of the people operating, or are important for operational point of view. So maybe you're forming a degradation compound that you definitely don't want to emit to the atmosphere. And you should know about it as early as possible, because you have to design your emission control technologies based on that. But to be able to do this, what you need is you need actually analytical methods. And there is no way around it. You need to develop LCMS methods to identify your degradation compounds, or GCMS, whatever it is, but you need to be able to identify the degradation compounds, and you need to have some sort of way to quantify them. And this can become quite complex. So the figure here shows just some of the degradation compounds that have been identified for 30 MVA. But it's not that you have to monitor all of them, but you just have to know what is formed, so that you can choose what you have to follow, what you have to take care of, what you have to be worried about. After the laboratory test, you need to qualify your solvents. You always need to do some piloting. And I think in a small pilots, like long-term testing to understand the degradation, because degradation is a very slow process, you need long times, and running it in a small pilots is cost efficient, at least better than running it in a large pilot. But you need this long-term testing under realistic conditions and for the real flue gas, for the gas that you're using. But you also need larger pilots, and those you will need to, for example, testing and qualifying your emission control technologies. You need to qualify your emissions. You need to make sure that you have good enough design for your emission control, so that you don't emit volatile degradation compounds. You should use the larger pilots also to check towards the previous work when it comes to the formation of the degradation compounds. Make sure that what you have seen earlier is actually what you see also in larger pilots. And of course, larger pilots are typically used to try to quantify energy consumption. And so there is like very many things that we should look into during the solvent development. But I collected a couple of take-home messages based on in the light of launch, in a way that we fit more focus on the emissions and on the degradation. So the solvent qualification and development should always include both looking at the process, but also looking at the solvent's performance. So you need to look in as a whole package. Solvent degradation is a potential showstopper, and you should always address it early in the solvent development. I still think there is a place for a need for large-scale degradation experiments, and this will give you the possibility to develop analytical methods. It gives you the possibility to form a large amount of these degradation compounds in an accelerated manner, so that it's easier to detect them and see them and identify them. But you will always need piloting with the real flue gas to qualify solvents when it comes to degradation, of course, also for the process performance. And as Kevin Rochelle also said earlier, you need to know your degradation compounds. There is no way around this. So you need to try to figure out what are the mechanisms, what are formed, make sure that you are not forming something you don't know about, at least something that could be dangerous, and you need to have analytical methods to actually analyze for them. That was actually all I had.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Anna. We have time for some questions. I propose that the participants raise their team's hands if they have a question, because then it's a bit more control that everybody owns. So if you have a question for Anna, please raise your hand, then we can address it. If there's a question from the audience here, and we also can address it, of course. No questions? Okay. That was a very clear story, I think. So then we move on with Andreas.
Yes.
You don't share your own screen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I will sit here because I think that's most practical, and so try to share the screen.
I think it's okay.
Yeah, okay. So this is about the solvent degradation database, which is developed in launch. And this is based on data was open source research data repository software framework. And the database is on a web portal, and REST API is developed on HTML with tilted access control. But this will be made public when we finish the launch project. So here is just an example here from the database. I will also go into it a bit later, but in this database there is entered a lot of data sets, and this is organized by some metadata, which is a description of the data, and each of them again includes several type of files, including pictures of the experimental equipment, but also procedures, and of course also the most important raw data or analytical data for different tests. So here I just highlighted one just to dig more into. So for instance, this is an MEA campaign done in solvent degradation, which is going through number 1. And for instance, this contains 7 files, as you can see. And you also have the metadata, which describes, and also there is reference to related publications. Yeah. So one important thing here is that every compound is uniquely identified here. So the entry here is for each compound, it's not just abbreviation, but also always the cause number must be included. And also here you see the instrumental analytical method that is used for the determination. So, and I will just try to go to the database here. Yeah, so here you see the entry page here to this database. So you can just click here to enter and sort them. So here you see different entries here with different subjects. You can search in the database. For instance, here we can search for EPO, which is a degradation products of MEA, for instance, and then here we get all the entries where this is included. And you can go to one of the files, for instance, and just get the data. And you can just go back here to this. The data set here, for instance, so I'll just show here. This is the type of the metadata where you have all the information which describes data here. There's a version control. And then also I would like to look at the raw data, for instance. Download it. have some time about it. So here you see, for instance, this is a campaign, and this is how it looks like. Here you have, of course, identification of the experiments, the time, which is what run, the different conditions for solar temperature, and so on. And then we have more analytical results. For each, you also have the class number and which kind of method used. Yeah, so, and then I can go back here and we can, for instance, look at and here you also get up a picture of this equipment. And in this case, then you have also this PIRB, or you can look at. So this is just how to find data and which is in, but of course you can also add that data, add new data sets, but then you have to log into that. So then you also have to sign in to get the properties to add your own data. So as mentioned here, you can then search for different compounds, and you can go to raw data. And what I thought in just online is just an example of how to use when you have a lot of data. So this is an example of different degradation experiments with MEA, and where the data is used with the principal component analysis just to visualize in 2 dimensions, which is much easier. So here you can see the different campaigns, and you can compare the pattern on the this is a selection of degradation compounds included in this. And for instance, here you can see which type of experiments are most like this pilot campaign. For instance, you see this launch with one, which is the SDR. It follows much the same trends as the pilot. And you have this pure oxidative degradation experiments. So the one that is most similar, the profile to the pilot and SDR, that is the experiments with a 6% low oxygen, but at high temperature of 60 or 75 degrees. That matches the profile of these degradation compounds. More like the SDR and this pilot. So the indication on each that is dates on each of the plots. Yeah. So we have a trend for each experiments to see the development versus time. So I think that was the final slide I have. So
Okay.
It's open for question.
Yeah, so this is now still an internal database to the project, right? On the syntax share, but after 1 or 2 months, then we will also publish this database.
Yeah, then it will be made public available.
Yeah.
Now it's via syntax control, so it's only for the project.
Yeah.
Currently, but that will be removed, so it will be, and the link to this will be on the launch website.
Yeah, indeed. And then you can also take a look at the data, but also add your own data, right? So it's more or less available as a growing, living database.
Yes, that is the hope that people can use data for to begin to and compare, but also add new data.
Yeah.
Because it's many test solvents that are not good.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be very nice to publish or show them, so others don't need to do the same experiment.
Yeah.
This doesn't work.
Yeah.
And also when it's added more, you also can go into and see which degradation compound is found for this solvent or
Yeah. I think it's a nice data storage for the whole community. We need get some knowledge on certain tests that we've done with solvents, and also add your own test and then spread the word and get more knowledge on all the solvents that are being researched.
Yeah, I think it's very important that it's not necessary if someone make a mistake and find this is not that others do not need to do the same mistakes.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, any questions from the audience, online or here in the room?
Can you explain a bit how to read the graph, actually?
Yeah, I can try. So it was most of them, but this principal components analysis, that is you use the whole data set and then you make new variables at the direction where you have most variation. So this is mathematically you make new variables that describes the variation in different direction, and you choose the one that, for instance, here is the two most largest principal compounds, and and then each experiments and then you plot it in this new coordinate system, and for each experiment you have days for the different. You see the development with time. Maybe I can go and try to put out that. For instance, if you see this experiment, so this is the development for a whole experiment until 36 days, for instance, at this temperature. This is an open oxidative. And here you have SDR campaigns. It's run 3 different years, and this is the number of days. And this is also for a pilot and campaign. And this is experiments here. It's also this is with higher oxygen and with iron added. Then the profile is different, as you can see here. So what you can maybe see here is maybe from this smaller experiments you can achieve much of the same profile as the pilot in a less time. So in this this is HIGRI, HEF-BOX, HIA, HIPO, and HOSA-DNH, which has been included here, as well as the AMIN methods.
Yeah.
But of course, the data had been normalized before they run into this PCA. Large numbers will have a large influence.
Okay. Any more questions? If not, then I propose we move on. And then I think Shuya is the next presenter. Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. So I'm going to share a little bit about the results and the thinking process also behind this degradation network model that was developed within Launch. Before I go into that, I just want to talk a little bit about where we started from, and I'm looking a little bit into previous literature. So, and I picked here the work from Leonard, and what he has done is he used a semi-flow batch reactor, very pretty name for having a vessel and then flowing gas through it, but having a liquid that is steady there, so the liquid doesn't flow, you have a vessel with a liquid, and then in this case 38% NA, for instance, and then you flow a gas through it, in this case containing oxygen, because he wanted to look into oxidative degradation. And then you can do that with different loadings and controlling temperature, and that's what he has done in these experiments. And by doing that, he could look into what type of degradation products were being formed over time. He ran these experiments for typically 21 days at different temperatures, different conditions in terms of CO2 in the gas, therefore different loadings in the liquid, and also different oxygen concentration in that. And then he could derive an expression for how fast is this MEA consumption over time as a function of temperature, but also the concentration of oxygen in the solvent. And this is a very typical way of measuring this kind of things and representing this. But if you think about the CO2 capture process, the only place in the process that we have constant oxygen concentration, or more or less constant oxygen concentration, is in the absorber packing. Because that's the only place where the solvent is in contact with the flue gas that has then this very large oxygen source, because the amount of oxygen in the gas is very large as compared to the amount of oxygen that actually gets absorbed by different amines. So you can look at it as an infinite source of oxygen, and in the packing, probably you're very close to saturation throughout the packing, and then an expression like this could be then used to understand what's happening in that. But then when you get to the absorber sum, for instance, then you don't have this source of oxygen anymore. What happens there is that your oxygen is consumed over time, and your solvent is possibly sitting there for 5-6 minutes. Your oxygen is being consumed, so you have actually a variable oxygen concentration with time. And this expression doesn't then necessarily work very well for that. So thinking about that, we thought about maybe modeling this in a bit different way, because we wanted the model to be also more representative of the absorber sum, the hot piping, the cross heat exchanger, but also because we wanted the model to be as generic as possible and as simple as possible. So it was like looking back and then thinking like, okay, well, more pragmatically, how could we rethink and redo this kind of work? And then with the reasoning that, okay, well, we need to simplify and try to make the lab work a little bit less expensive also to facilitate this kind of investigations for different solvents. Ideally, also, we would like this work not to be dependent on knowledge on different degradation products and kinetics of the individual reactions in there. So we had a lot of really high hopes for this model and a lot of different targets in there that we wanted to achieve. But of course, I mean, when you do things like this, you're going for a more engineering, pragmatic approach and letting go or a more fundamental approach. You also lose some details in this, and so there's a trade-off between this. But we thought that okay, this might be a very useful thing to develop anyhow. But when we don't really have information, if we're talking about a new amine and so on, we don't have really a lot of information about the degradation products and kinetics of different reactions and so on. It's also really hard to try to understand, for instance, what is this stoichiometric factor, how many moles of our oxygen being consumed is actually degrading the amine and so on. So one way that we thought, okay, well, we can overcome this by actually using pilot data to calibrate this kind of model. And so that's how we've been thinking about this and how we've been doing this. So if we look at the model, it's a very simple reaction proposed in there. So amine plus a certain number of moles of oxygen will lead to degradation products, right? So generically put like that. And that allows us to very simply relate the degradation rate of oxygen in time or the consumption of oxygen in time to the degradation rate of the amine with this parameter A. And the oxygen decay in time is something that we can relatively easily measure. So we thought, okay, instead of bubbling oxygen through a reactor, we just load amine in a liquid with oxygen, and we measure over time this oxygen decay. So we turn the experiment around a little bit, and we do actually an experiment that mimics what happens in the absorber sum instead of the absorber packing. So that was the thinking behind it. So this is the experimental setup that we have been using. So this, let's call it the first generation oxidative deplete instrument that we call Odin. Gary also already mentioned in his presentation that in Texas they have developed a new generation of this that can also go to higher temperatures because they have a limitation with this system. But basically, they're quite similar in the sense that, okay, you have an oxygen probe in the liquid there, and you measure oxygen decay over time, and then you can correlate that to a certain kinetic constant. Advantage of doing it like this is that this is a more simple way to then correlate to what's happening in the plant. And also the experiment typically lasts for a couple of hours if we're working with MEA, loaded MEA. And if we're working with something that is more resistant to oxidative degradation, then we might be looking into 1 day, but differently from weeks from the previous proposed votes to look into this. And some typical results here. So the generated for 38% MEA. As we can see how this evolves, and this graph shows what we can measure, what we measured over 1.5 hours. I'm not going to go into a lot of details in here, but what we are changing here is the loading and the temperature. And we see that, okay, for unloaded MEA, there's hardly any consumption of oxygen in the first 1.5 hour. Here we see it going down, but very slowly. And when it's loaded, then things accelerate quite a lot. So, and the loading and temperature will make a difference here. We can then translate these results into results of what would happen in a full-scale CO2 capture plant, because our model allows us to relate time, which is then the residence time in the equipment, temperature, and loading to a certain oxygen consumption rate. So, and this kind of information, like temperature, loading, and time, we normally have from simulations, right? And from the design of the capture plant itself. So if we take, and then we just do typical example here for 38% MEA results, a certain packing in here in an absorber, and then we have a certain liquid temperature that is simulated here. We also know the residence time of the liquid in each segment of this simulation. Then we can calculate how much oxygen we would have to begin with in each one of the segments, and then with the model correlate that to MEA consumption. And what we see here is that, and that's also directly derived from the Odin results, so that for MEA, the top of the absorber, where we have relatively high temperatures and low loadings, is where most of our MEA consumption actually happens. So that also points at the direction on how would you actually think about controlling degradation, for instance, by controlling temperature at the top of the column. So what we see happening in the bottom of this column is that at the packing height of 13 meters, there was an intercooler installed in here. And we can also think, okay, what would happen with the degradation if I would install an intercooler after the first section of packing? So how would that improve my system? So these are typical results from the degradation network model. And with that, we can then also try to understand for the different unit operations in the plant. For instance, here I'm comparing absorber packing and then absorber sump and then the cross heat exchanger. We can try to understand what happens in the different operations in that. So for MEA, it's clear here that most of the degradation occurs in the absorber packing. So we could use absorber temperature to control the degradation. But of course, I mean, different amines will behave differently. We have done the same exercise for CISA1, for instance, where oxidative degradation is much slower in the absorber column itself. And then most of the degradation actually happens after the the absorber piping and then towards the absorber sump and then the cross-heat exchange and hot piping in the sections of the plant. So for different solvents, of course, different measures would be more effective in controlling degradation, and that's what the model really allows us to start understanding and then proposing for the different solvents. Also, I mean, it's what we're presenting here is the first version of this model. The model and the report explaining it will be made publicly available in the launch website. And in the report explaining it, you will also see that there are quite some data gaps in this first version of the model. So what we are already doing now is, and then this goes beyond launch, but we are updating the model with extra data that was going to be generated for MEA and CETA1, and with the aim of releasing a new version of the model by the end of the year. And yeah, I mean, I think the important thing to mention is that we have now developed this methodology that we can actually use for any solvent, because the whole methodology is really solvent independent. And then with this being implemented and validated, then we can actually use this type of degradation network model for any kind of solvent that is then being developed to look into oxidative degradation in different plants with also different designs in that. So I think those were the messages regarding this degradation network model. So I don't know if there are any questions.
No questions from the audience? No, okay. Thanks, Lila. Then I guess we move on to the next one. This is the presentation of Irini, and thank you very much. I hope everybody on site is online.
Yeah, I'm here, Peter.
Very good. Let me see. There he is. Great. The presentation is yes. Yeah, I think it's good, right? Yeah. I will move that. Okay, Ekram, go ahead, take it away.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Rini. So good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, I could not make to Netherlands because of the plant still being operational. So this presentation is a combined effort of TNO, SINTEF, and Sheffield University. Can I have next slide, please? So we have heard a lot about solvent degradation. So actually, it's very slow process and takes long time, thousands of hours. So what we tried to do in this work package 4 was to try to see what happens during the degradation, but in a shorter span of time. So devise ways how we can accelerate the integration degradation by enhancing or elevating the parameters which potentially cause degradation. So what we try to do is to try to run similar conditions at 2 different scales, which we present in this presentation at the smaller scale at TNO and at the bigger scale at Turk. Next, please. So we've done a number of campaigns at both test sites, but in this presentation, we have tried to limit them to not to confuse everybody because it lots of data and lots of complications the way the operation is being run. So the ones we're presenting here are number one, the top one, increase. Okay, so four different themes were tested. So one was the baseline, which I will come to in a minute. And then from that baseline, we changed to different other parameters. For example, we increased oxygen concentration in the flue gas from 7 baseline to 18%, 19%. And then from 35%, we changed MEA concentration to 40%. So 35 is baseline. Then we increased stripper temperature from 120 baseline to 130 degrees C. And we also introduced NOx into the flue gas to see the impact. Next, please. So this is the smaller scale test rig at TNO, which is 25 kilograms per day. It's a mobile unit, can be transported. Full cycle of absorption and desorption. FTIR at the top of the absorber to do online monitoring of the gas. So for all the test campaigns, we used synthetic gas by mixing nitrogen, O2, CO2. At Turk, we mixed air with CO2. And we aim for gas turbine flue gas compositions, which is 5 to 5.5% CO2. As I said, 35% MEA was a baseline. At this small scale, initially there was no water wash, but I think later on it was implemented. Next, please. So this is Turk plant is 1,000 kilograms per day capacity. Obviously, we were not running at full capacity because it's designed for coal combustion. It again has a full cyclic operation, absorption, desorption. It has two absorbers. In the picture, you can see the two left-hand columns are two absorbers, and far right side is a water wash, and second from right is FGD. The stripper is not visible here because it's on the far side of the plant. So another thing you can see here is the water wash is not on the top of the absorber. It's a standalone column on the ground. And then the conditions, I don't want to repeat them. Next, please. So the baseline, as I said, was 35% MEA with 7.6% ish oxygen. There was a little variation between the two sides, but there was the aim and 120 degrees C stripper temperature. Then we went for increasing oxygen content as we were using artificial flue gas. So we injected well, in our case, we went other way. So O2 was with air, high O2 was with air, and then we introduced nitrogen for the baseline. Then we went for high MEA concentration from 35 to 40%. At launch rig, it was because of the issues with water wash implemented later on. So actually the concentration was around 37%. Then we went for increasing the stripper temperature, which was increased from 120 to 130 degrees C at TNO, but at Turk, because of the limitations of the system, we could only go up to 128 degrees C. So there are some discrepancies between the operational conditions at the two sites. And NOx introduction, so we did at Turk, we did 15 ppm, and launch rig 2 at TNO was done a bit earlier, which was at higher concentrations. Go on, Arini, you have to. Yeah, it's fine. The fresh solvent was used for each test campaign. We did water wash, removed the solvent, did water wash, and then at TNO there was also compressed air drying, but at Turk we could not do that for just water wash and then start with the fresh solvent. Your turn, Arini.
Thank you, Ekram. So we continue with sampling and analysis. So sampling at least twice a week, we took samples from the campaign to be then analyzed. And there were analyses that we did when we were in the lab, and then more precise analysis that was done by the third partner in this work, Synthet. So we analyzed almost daily MEA, water, CO2. We looked for typical oxidic degradation products, different acids like acetic, formic acid, nitrate, nitrite. Then we looked for typical MEA degradation products as also documented in the literature. So here is a list of different degradation products. And then we also looked for metals. Moving to the results, I will first show you the results for the acids. So how now the results are presenting, we are looking at the different accelerated degradation campaigns in each rig, and then we make a comparison between the two. So this is what we see also here. So when it comes to the assets, the formic acid was the most dominant acid in both the launch rig and TERC. What we see in this graph is the concentration of formic acid as a function of operation hours. And then you see with different symbols, different colors, the different accelerated degradation campaigns. So what we typically see is that the baseline, which is the green line with the X's on the bottom, and most often it has the lowest concentration of the formic acid in this case. And when you apply the different accelerated degradation techniques, this concentration increases. In this graph, you see that when we have the higher oxygen, we actually have higher concentrations compared to the campaigns where we have higher oxygen and increased weight percent MA, for example, the blue line, or increased the stripping temperature, the gray line. But that is because actually our starting point was not zero. So we found out that already in the first sample there was iron. So we believe that this is the reason why in this campaign we start at a higher level. When we look at TERC, again the formic acid is the most dominant component from the acids. And here the trends are quite different. We also see that there's lower formic acid at the higher weight percent MA and the higher stripping temperature. Actually, this you cannot see, but there it is written that this is actually the detection limit of the technique. So it's quite interesting to see that the baseline is actually higher. If we compare the scales and the concentration at approximately 200 hours, we see that we are approximately at the same levels, so not a significant difference. We move on to the major degradation components that were found to be HIPPO, MEA-urea, and HIGLI. In both the launch rig and in TERC, and this in agreement with previous work that was done in the STR rig, which is a smaller rig than these two, where again those three were the most dominant ones. And then I'll take you through the behaviors that we see for HIPPO and MEA-urea, that were the two top products, first for the launch rig and then for the TERC. So on the launch rig, when we look at the HIPPO, what I get from this graph is that the lowest concentrations of this degradation product is the baseline, so the lowest oxygen content. Then the rest, with the exception of the high stripping temperature, are approximately the same. And then with the high stripping temperature, we really see a more sharp increase. Looking at the MEA-urea, the trends are also the same. We have the lowest concentration at the baseline case, and then the highest concentration that is in there, it is in the higher stripping temperature. I'm going to just clear this both here, and I'll move on to TERC. In TERC, when it comes to the HIPPO component, we see also the same trend. We see that in the baseline we have the lowest concentration that we expected. But then in comparison with the launch rig, the stripping temperature now, it's not the highest, but it's rather the second highest. And we also see this trend with MEA-urea, and even the baseline is a little bit higher. So the behavior is not very consistent between the MEA and the HIPPO in this case. So it is highest in the launch rig at the highest stripping temperature, and then highest at the higher weight percent MEA in TERC. But then what I want us to look is where we put the same scales in both graphs, because the campaigns lasted for a different duration. We do see actually that if we look up to the 200 operating hours, we are approximately at the same levels in both the launch rig and there. The exception is the high stripping temperature, what we see in the launch rig. But actually, we have an explanation for this, because the higher stripping temperature in there was a different stripping pressure. So this means that we actually had a different loading, and this can be the reason why we see these differences. Then we have the metals. So it is the iron that is the most dominant in our in all our campaigns. For the launch rig, you see that the iron is found the highest at the higher oxygen, which I explained earlier that we had actually iron already in the start. But then what really strikes us is how sharp is the slope of for the formation of iron at the higher stripping temperature. So it comes almost like vertically compared to the other lines. For dirt, it is again a little bit different. The results. What we see actually here is that the lowest concentration is shown at the higher stripping temperature, and then the highest at the highest weight percent of MEA. Still, if we look at the same scales, the concentrations that we see are not very different from each other, although there are considerable differences between the two rigs. To summarize and conclude a few things, we have tested different accelerated degradation techniques, and the results were compared between the third pilot, so 100 kilos CO2 per day capacity, and the launch rig, a much smaller rig, 25 kilos CO2 per day. We see that increasing the CO2 content in the gas is an efficient accelerated degradation technique, and then additional acceleration is seen in most cases when we combine with the other acceleration techniques. The major degradation products were HIPPO, MEA, urea, and Higley, while from the acids, formic acid was the most dominant. And then launch rig was also able to follow these trends that we also saw in there. We see differences at which acceleration degradation techniques we have the highest concentrations, but especially for the difference that we see for the high stripping temperature. This can be because of the difference in the operating parameters. That is really, I think, worth also testing. To close, the launch rig was capable of predicting the major degradation components found in the larger third pilot plant. Longer tests and more similar operating conditions can possibly explain the differences that we see in the degradation trends. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eleni. Thanks, Ekrem, also. Are there any questions from this for those two presenters?
I have a question on the metals. Do you think that this difference in the metals is because the plant in Turkey is new? And that's why they don't see a lot of metals in solution? Have you ever operated, did you operate other campaigns, Acorn, for example, in which you saw more metals in solution?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Well, no, metal is not new because we follow a cleaning procedure after changing the metal. Yes, the first campaign was with the fresh metal, but we because we moved the plant from old site to the new site, and then we cleaned it with carbonate, and then we passivated it with the lower concentration of MEA before going to full concentration. But if the fresh metal was the issue, it should have been for the first test campaign, but subsequent test campaigns, they were all followed one after the other. So there should not be any impact of of the surface being fresh. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Can I also comment on it? Is it true that the analysis for the metal was different from TNO on the top?
Yeah, the packed analysis were done by Andreas at Sintef. So apart from, no, sorry, the iron analysis, yes. So at Turk, we use offline colorimetric method. So basically what it does is you take the same sample as a baseline and then you put a reagent which reacts with iron and then you just cross-examine it. I think TNO used probably a more sophisticated method which can determine more metals than just iron. So our instrument can only measure iron. It can't measure other metals.
Yeah, so that could be an explanation. It was matrix effect on the color or something that could influence the one metal. So
No. I think Gary also raised his hand. Gary?
Yes, I had a question about the source of the NOx. Was that introduced as NO or is NO2?
NO2.
So there's
At
15
Turk.
parts per million of NO2?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, for us, we run. We started with NO. We also had a bottom there, and then we saw also a lot of mist. And then the result that we present here is with NO2. So it was a bottle of NO2 also.
That's the other way around. So
Yeah.
we started with NO2, then we saw mist, and then we put NO to react with air, so then we could form NO2.
Yeah.
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 So we think we introduced NO2, but we actually used NO.
Well, but we measured for that, so we did introduce NO2.
Say that one more time. So, so we think it's NO2. We analyzed and we showed that it was NO2.
Measured, and it is NO2, but we used the bottle of NO, and then we reacted it with air, but we could measure both separately, and then we know that it's NO2 that was introduced.
And that was done both in both pilot plants?
No, at Turk we introduced it as NO2.
Okay, thank you.
At Turk, we didn't have any mist, or?
No.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
It may be because we have absorber, then water wash is a long path.
Yeah. Okay.
We don't have a water wash in this country.
Okay. Yeah. Any more questions? If not, then we're very sharp on schedule, I would say. And then we have a short break of 15 minutes. So then I hope to see you all back in 15 minutes. So have a coffee or something else, and then we continue. Okay, welcome back. After this short break, I'm going to continue the program with a lot of testing results also in this part of the meeting. And I would like to invite Julian again to the floor for a presentation on the laundry.
So, before we go into a lot of results from different launch rigs, then I think it's nice that we present what we mean with launch rig itself. So, in this project, we actually had 4 different equipment that we called the launch rigs. So they were equipment that were used in tests within the project, or that had been used in tests before. So, for instance, the Sintef solvent degradation rig, the SDR rig, that was in one of the pictures from Hami's presentation. It wasn't really run during this project, but we used the results of the SDR rig to evaluate, for instance, degradation of MEA, and those results are available, for instance, in the database that Andrea showed. But one of the launch rigs was the TNO mini plant that Inini just presented some results from, and the other was the TERC plant that Abram presented results from in the same presentation. And if we look at the TNO mini plant, it has a scale of 25 kilos per day, so 1 kilo per hour roughly of CO2. And the TERC plant is roughly 40 times larger than that. And to complete that, we also had plant built, dedicatedly built within launch. That was all non-metallic plant to evaluate degradation in the absence of metals. And what I'm presenting today was the result of brainstorming amongst all the partners in the project, thinking about, okay, based on everything that we've learned in all this discussion and so on, what would like automate really sort of look like? What are the features that we would like for it to have, which type of scale and so on. So that's the thinking behind it, and the objective was really to design a test rig that could be used to evaluate solvent degradation, so to be part in a solvent qualification program that would render realistic results, but also direct results, so results that we can directly apply, and that we don't need to do a lot of them data treatments to understand what's going on at a minimal cost. So if we look at how CO2 capture system is normally looking like with the absorption, desorption, and so on, we very quickly get into the conclusion that, okay, for a launch rig, we really want to have this absorption, desorption cycle in there. So that's a bare minimum. But also within launch, we tested a lot of different things related to this, different elements in the cycle. And this varies a little bit from rig to rig. But in the end, there are many different factors in there, and I'm going to go through them and how we thought about this and how we are projecting like what the launch rig actually should look like based on this. So if we start by scale, I think this is one of the most important things to define because of the target also of having as low cost as possible. Immediately from that, it follows that the plants should be as small as possible. But being small, we also have to assure that this plant will render realistic direct results that could be useful. The proposed size for this is to use a plant of about 1 kilo per hour, so more in the direction of the launch rig number 2. And with that, not only like the size or the cyclic capacity and so on, but we also have to look into absorber height. And in there, of course, absorber height will be quite dependent on which solvents we want to work with, which type of packing do we have. But I think the important thing to think of is also like, okay, we want to have realistic cyclic operation in the sense that the lean and rich loadings that we will be achieving with this plant should be realistic to also have a realistic profile in the absorber. So those are the minimum characteristics in there. And within launch, we actually got a chance to test the launch rig number 2 against the RWE pilot, which is 300 times larger, roughly. And what we've done is what we call head-to-head operation. So we have the 2 plants side by side. So this TNO plant was sent to RWE, and a small inventory of 20 liters was taken from the RWE plant and was filled into the TNO plant, which was already sufficient volume for the plant to be operated. And here what we see is the evolution of degradation products over time in the two plants. So and basically we see a very good agreement between the contents of formate, acetate, oxalate, glycolate, and propionate in both solvents, and these are typical degradation products from oxidative degradation of CISA1, which was the solvent being tested in this. So I think with this one, we validated that the launch rig could really follow the degradation profile of CISA1. And Andreas showed this principal component graph in his presentation, and there's a different way of looking at it, but there it was also shown that the SDR rig could follow the degradation profile of pilots in case of degradation of MEA. So I think what we are really showing here is that even like the small sizes that we're talking about here of 1 kilo per hour are they suffice if the target of the plant is to look into the profile of degradation products. So this is really good news when we are trying to lower costs of this test, right? The second point is that we would like to be able to work with real flue gas, right? Because minor components in the flue gas will influence degradation. And to be able to work with real flue gas, then we need to have a mobile plant. And then to have a mobile plant, it should be easy to transport it and should be also easy to operate with it in different industrial sites. So that means, not necessarily there will be cover and so on. So if the plant can be made weatherproof and winterized and so on, then that facilitates testing. So we show here in the picture an example. So that the previous plant that was shown in the previous slide is actually set inside of this 3 containers system. So we have a CO2 capture plant that is both mobile and contained into this closed environment, which really facilitates both transportation and operation at different sites. What's also important to mention when it comes to using real flue gas is that then we have to be aware of the flue gas quality. So of course, I mean, when we are drawing flue gas from stack, that may come with a lot of salts, for instance, and if we are going to operate a full-scale CO2 capture plant, quench column in there will be designed with the ability also to separate the salts out and so on. So the same thing. The same ability should be built into this plant. So this plant should be able to deliver to the absorber the flue gas with the conditions that we would like to have also for the full-scale plants. Then we will have representative tests. When it comes to residence times, so the residence times in general need to be representative, particularly absorber stripper sumps are of importance. And nice to have that is relatively easy to embed in such a small scale plant is that you have flexibility with this residence time, so that you can try to vary this residence time and also see what's the effect of that in your degradation, because it might be that depending on where you want to install your full scale plant, there will be limitations in there regarding how you can lay the piping and so on. So the piping may be longer or shorter, and then where the different equipment can be displaced in there, and residence times may vary from implementation place to place. So, and then if you have this flexibility embedded in a degradation rig, then that's a really good advantage. And when it comes to degradation mitigation technologies, what I think is really important, or what we think is really important, is that whatever we intend to have in the full-scale plant would also be available in this small-scale plant, because we've seen that things like, for instance, active carbon can have an effect on degradation. Whether this effect is a positive one or a negative one, it depends on the type of active carbon, but it will have an effect, and because it will have an effect, then it's also good to implement it in the small scale system. Oxygen removal and so on. So there's different techniques. If they are planned for the full scale, then they should be also implemented and tested in the large scale. And in principle, we agreed to leave reclaiming out of this tests. I think the only reason that I would see for necessarily implementing reclaiming is in there is if it is clear that necessarily reclaiming will be done continuously at the full scale. But even so, it would be hard to implement it here because normally reclaiming is then done with a slipstream of the solvent. And here we're talking about smaller scale plants. So yeah, so if we would be reclaiming a slipstream of the solvent flow rate that is already 20 kilos per hour, then we might be looking into an operation of dealing with milliliters per hour, which already becomes a very clumsy to design for. So in principle, at this scale, no reclaiming. To wrap up the minimum requirements for design of this plant, materials of construction, they should be the same as the materials that are planned for full scale. In general, then we're talking about stainless steel, because the amines and the degradation products, they tend to be corrosive towards carbon steel, for instance. And we've seen that in different plants and different pilots, people have the tendency to try to also save some money with materials of construction, going for non-metallic materials, plastic materials in the low temperature range and so on. But this can also influence the behavior of the system. So ideally, going for the same material as the full-scale plant really helps with having realistic behavior and de-risking operation at full scale. And then the last point in this discussion was about the type of instrumentation that should be there. Besides normal online instrumentation, right? Okay, temperature, pressures, flows, and this kind of things needs to be measured. Also because it needs to be controlled. This is a full automated plant that's supposed to be running 24/7. So this is a basis of the instrumentation, of course. But then you should be able to look into what's being formed and emitted from in terms of degradation products, but also in terms of your own amines and so on. So having FDR to look into the gas phase is also quite important. Because we are talking about degradation, and oxidative degradation is main component here, then oxygen analyzer in the gas and ideally also in the liquid is also very nice to have. But one thing that is a must-have is samples need to be taken and sent for analysis. For amine, CO2, and water, for the system, for you to understand what's happening in your system in terms of capture and so on, but also for degradation compounds. I think Hannah made a strong case about getting to know your amine and the different degradation compounds that are formed and so on in the lab first, and having analytical capabilities for that. And I believe that at this stage is where you verify that what you've done in the lab was a good work, and then you can explain the degradation. And at this stage, I think it's still quite important to then monitor this degradation compounds and to have certainty so that you can operate at full scale, possibly with a more simple scheme for sampling and offline analysis. And what is nice to have, and something that a lot of different people are developing, is also online solvent monitoring, because that offers an opportunity to lower the costs with sampling and analysis and so on. So if we put all that together, then those components then leads to what we are now calling the launch rig for degradation analysis. And also in the website, we'll be releasing a report describing all these different discussions here, or discussion points, and there will be some basic drawings of this launch rig then that could be followed then by people. So that's the...
Yeah, thanks, Juliana. Are there any questions?
From Gary.
Yeah. Gary, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to ask if you had made use of any tracers in the pilot plant testing, or have a recommendation for a tracer.
That's a good point. yeah, I think the tracers is interesting. Yeah, so yeah, you mean for understanding your balances that the so do you have a recommendation like I've seen things like lithium, for instance, being added to but do you have a recommendation of what you're using, for instance, in CCC?
We've been using lithium.
Yeah.
And at CCC, we can also use, sometimes you can use sulfate. And we know some that don't work. We tried phosphate once and it didn't stay. But lithium is the one that we've had the best success with.
Yeah, I think for us it's the same. So I would imagine that lithium is probably the best to work with unless someone has another opinion. Yeah, but that's a good point here. I'll also add it to the analytical part of it.
Jafari also had a question.
Yeah, thank you. Ruzbe Jafari, I'm from TCM. I have a question about item number 3. You mentioned about residence time and as a kind of nice to have flexibility. So, well, like all the reactions, we know the temperature probably have a negative impact on the degradation. So amount of hot inventory residence time there is basically could have a very significant impact. So if we want to provide that flexibility and minimize the hot inventory, any comment that what challenges are there from the design point of view, and how this flexibility can be provided to the plant?
Yeah, so I think in terms of how to provide the flexibility in a plant like this, I think it's relatively easy to vary the residence time in the sums, for instance, by varying the levels. And in terms of piping, you can have vessels embedded in the pipe. So this is something that Gary has done with the launch with his group. He designed a vessel to increase the residence time in the hot ridge line. And then you can either have this vessel online or bypass it. And by doing that, you then have a flexible residence time in this part of the plant. And then in doing that, you can achieve this without really playing around with the L by G, which would then have many different impacts over your operations. So of course, I mean, at this small scale, this becomes a relatively simple exercise to do. But yeah, and I think I agree with you. I mean, ideally, from the purely degradation perspective, and the smallest the residence time, the better. But of course, I mean, on practical terms, there is a certain minimum residence time that you need in sums to be able to have good control of your plant and the flows and the pumps and so on. And the piping, you normally design the piping as short as possible anyhow. But I mean, there are sometimes complications with the geographical distribution of different equipment in plants and so on. Sometimes it's hard to feed a CO2 capture plant, retrofit a CO2 capture plant on an existing plant, and then your piping ends up being a little bit longer than initially intended. So, I mean, having this flexibility then allows you to do this kind of tests.
Okay, any more questions? No? Then thanks, Julian. I think then I would like to invite you to the podium. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's start to explain what we tested at Niederaußen. Lucas sources a lignite-fired power plant with a capture capacity of 7.2 tons per day at a capture rate of 90%, and we have 24/7 operation. We use CESAR-1 in a long-term testing campaign for the validation of the different sort management technologies that we tested. And you can see it here on the slide. We tested especially NO2 removal by high sulfate dosing in a pre-scrubber. We had also 2 campaigns on ion exchange, one was an anion ion exchange resin, and the other was a serial configuration of a cation and an anion ion exchange resin. And we also tested absorptive removal of contaminants by active carbon. We also tested 2 sorts of active carbon. There is a quite unique testing campaign that we could realize in launch, already starting on the project before. So from that launch is a follow-up project, even for the Aligned CCS project. But we started the campaign on the 9th of April 2019. Today is day 1409, and we will end on the 27th or 28th of this month with this campaign. You can see in the left diagram the bars mark the different phases where we applied the different solvent mitigation technologies. As you can see that at the beginning for 5,000 operating hours, we even had not used a particle filter or an active carbon filter, but then we activated them, and yeah, you can see that we have a very low degradation rate in the end with CESAR1. Gary already mentioned it in this presentation. So CESAR1 has really high stability regarding oxidative degradation, and we have a linear degradation behavior. And in the right diagram, you can see that we have really continuous operation. So with now more than 34,000 testing hours, we have really operated it. So, and I think this is quite unique, so that we really have a testing that is similar to that what you will or want to achieve in industrial scale application of amine-based post-combustion capture. So, and our opinion is also from this testing campaign, we need sufficient testing time. We must give the solvent the chance to degrade when we want to test the mitigation technologies, but we also must give the system enough time to learn what is then really the effect on the different mechanisms that are responsible for degradation and so on. Starting with active carbon, here is a test versus active carbon A. When we use this, first we can change the color of the solvent. It looks much nicer, so it becomes lighter in the color. Also, this active carbon A was able to remove some iron, also some nickel from the solvent. This is also good, but when we now investigate or try to find out what's the effect on the degradation rate, then we have here in diagram, in the diagram on the right, the result that there's no significant impact on the degradation rate. So the y-axis shows the increase of the acid number, so a semi-quantitative measure for degradation of the solvent. So all acidic compounds in the solvent are covered. So this was also already mentioned that all those cats and dogs in the solvent, we don't know them, but using this semi-quantitative measures help us to see and also to cover these components. And the same is with the uncalibrated compounds. These are compounds which we see in the gas chromatogram. We don't know what it is, but we see it is something is there. So and we can also use this as a measure that even this hidden components we don't know are understood how they will develop during the operation time. So conclusion here: active carbon A, yes, color is lighter. We can remove iron, but no effect on the degradation rate. and we tested the second active carbon, and this was not able to remove iron from the solvent. And another conclusion from this test was that we saw a strong increase of the foaming tendency of the solvent. So we had with active carbon A or without any active carbon, we had to add perhaps 1 time per month anti-foaming agent, but this rate increased by a factor of 14. So when we applied active carbon B, so every 2 days we had to add it. So it seems that this active carbon B should not be used in capture plants. Coming now to the NO2 removal campaign, also there Gary had already explained what was found at Niederhausen. So we tested for 2 months or so. We were able to remove 80 or more than 80% of the NO2 from the flue gas at a low level. So really the low number concentration. That's less than perhaps in the range of 0.2 milligrams that we achieved. But again, when we use the same methodology to describe the degradation behavior on the right, so y-axis again this increase of the acid number, and we can compare it here with the situation that we had before this test, we see that there was an increase. So it seems that there is, also for Caesar 1 at Niederhausen, we could not find any positive effect that we could reduce the degradation. Important results were received from the test of the ion exchange. Here the first campaign with anion exchange. We treated the solvent inventory 2 times in total, and were able, as you can see in the diagram on the left side, that we could reduce heavily the concentrations of contaminants in the solvent, so by more than 50%. Interesting is now the question, what is the result on the degradation? And again, this diagram on the right side shows it, that before we had only this active carbon filter was tested. So, and after applying this anion ion exchange, you can see that this increase rate doubled. So it seems making the solvent cleaner is here the consequence that we have a higher degradation rate. Then a very important result was that we could found it here in the test, but also in a pre-test in the laboratory with the resin, with the ion exchange resin, that we can remove iron from the solvent with this resin, which might be astonishing, as iron should be a cation, so iron 2, iron 3 plus, and nevertheless, this explains or is explained by the fact that we have quite a lot of negative charge anions in the solvent as degradation products. We have the inorganic compounds like chloride, sulfate, nitrate, and then we have all the organic compounds, the organic acid residues. So they are all able to complex iron. We have no free naked iron in the solvent, and this is the explanation that we have negative charged iron compounds in the solvent, and we could remove around 40% from the solvent. This is important because when we discuss the catalytic activity of metals in the solvent, and it's becoming more and more clear that it's not only the concentration of the metals or the sort of metals that are important, but also the environment in the solvent, so the solvent matrix, because this is then decisive for the complex formation, the accessibility of the catalytic metals for reaction partners, and also for the redox potential of the metal. Here the results from the cation and anion exchange resin tests. On the left side, the organic acids, and on the right, the inorganic compounds. You can say a great success. So 70 to 100% of the contaminants can be removed. This is good. So we can remove inactive components from the solvent. But now it's the interesting question: what's the effect on the degradation rate? And to remind it, we reduce the concentration of the contaminants to a level that we more or less at the beginning of the overall campaign, or we for the first time use active carbon. And this diagram is again this increase of the acid number. Now the important finding is the red dots are the increase in the cation after the cation and ion exchange campaign, and we have really the same increase rate as we found it for only removing anions from the solvent. So it seems that there are some equilibriums in the background, and if we take out the ligands, then we push the system into a system which then generates this degradation rate. So, and it's not depending here on the absolute concentrations of the metals. It's this interaction of the solvent matrix with the metals. So, and it means also making the solvent cleaner. You must be careful. For Caesar 1, we see it that not the smallest increase rate was not found for the very fresh solvent, so really directly at the beginning, so from day 0 to day 7-4, it was found for let's say slightly aged solvent. This was before we also used for the first time the active carbon filter. So excessive cleaning of the solvent might cause losses, unnecessary losses of solvent. And yeah, there is potential to optimize the system. Coming to the conclusion, adsorptive removal of contaminants and NO2 removal were not effective for Caesar 1 to reduce the degradation at Niederhausen. I think also Gary explained it. The hypothesis is that we have shown that we can remove successfully NO2 from the flue gas. Nevertheless, it might be that we have a back formation of NO to NO2 on the path to the absorber and also in the absorber. We have then seen that we can remove ions from the solvent, and this is good. And by removing inactive components from the solvent inventory, we can reduce the solvent pump around. Nevertheless, we have also found out that there is an increase of the degradation rate. That this might be found also for other solvents. But I think from this result, from this long-time testing, we also, I think, have some fresh ideas for laboratory experiments and have some recommendations. So we should also make more tests in the laboratory, not only always with fresh solvent. We should also use aged solvent for making this test. It is highly complicated, this cats and dogs, but in the laboratory we have to design experiments which have the right balance between this complexity, but also focusing then on the real question. For example, regarding this complex formation. It's really important, I think I repeat this, that we have long-time testing in pilot plants with real flue gas, so that we can evaluate some models and the findings from laboratory tests. This goes really hand in hand. And yeah, the solvent matrix is important and some degradation products might protect the solvent for regarding the degradation. So make it cleaner. I don't say make it more dirtier, the solvent. No, this is not the recommendation, but be careful. Too clean might be negative. That's all.
Thank you, Peter. Any questions? Go.
Did you calculate the loss of CSO1 as also a mean loss?
Yes, I think we sent it to you. I think this was balanced, you might remember.
Oh, yeah.
I remember. Yeah. But also regarding this loss of solvent, and sure, because sometimes there is perhaps also then the question how it works. So solvent management means also emission management, yeah, because we have losses of solvent, and we in this 1,400 days we had in total 9 times the green arrows to refill solvent. So that means we have to add fresh solvent to the solvent loop, but we have no drain of the solvent or any exchange of the bleed and feed or exchange of the solvent inventory. And that means this all non-volatile degradation products, they will remain in the solvent inventory, but they will also perhaps a part will also degrade. This is also something. What we see here is always the sum of the formation, but also the degradation of the organic compounds. Yeah. It's not for chloride for sure. This is chloride, so I cannot degrade it. But it's an interesting question. What happens with propionate or with longer molecules? Will they also oxidize in the end to water and carbon dioxide? Then they are not any longer disturbing us in the system. But clear, we have to take into consideration emissions, and even in our calculations for the balance, we have also to take into consideration the sampling, because 1,400 days, perhaps on an average 1 kilogram sample per day, then also you end up with quite a lot of solvent.
There's a question online from Alex Voice. Alex, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Peter, and thank you for the talk. I just was curious about the action and mechanism of formic acid. You mentioned the ligand effect, which I think is very plausible. But I suppose the formate could also just be acting as kind of inhibitor directly by some kind of free radical chemistry. Do you have any thoughts on the mechanism for the effect you saw with the potential effective formate in the mildly degraded solvent?
So to be honest, my first candidate to be a high potential ligand would be perhaps something like ethylene diamine, oxalate, so bidental ligands, because they have steric effect. So this accessibility is and the binding is stronger. If you compare the redox potential for the water complex of iron and the other extreme is EDTA, then it's really a huge difference. And then it's not astonishing that you will find that there is a different behavior regarding also how aggressive in principle then this metal ions are. If formic acid is really, or the formic complexes are responsible here, I cannot answer it. This is, I think, what we will hand over or hand back to the laboratories. I think this is work that can and should and will be done in the future. So in principle, we have seen here some experiments in the former presentations which investigated the impact of oxygen or perhaps then different metal concentrations in the solvent. I think the next generation of experiments should be carried out by dosing these ligands to the solvent and then find out how this differs, also the behavior. Will it increase? Will it slow down? in principle, it can be easily done, and I'm pretty sure it will be done. And I know TNO has the idea to do this. Yeah, and perhaps some others also.
Really? So Peter, I think I've asked you this question maybe in 2022 in one of our online meetings, whether the metal ion is available for an electron shuttle effect as it exists as a ligand. In other words, we think of the salts in solution, you can add metal salts, and you think of them as being readily available, but when they're in solution, and we have this consensus that they're complex, does that render them unavailable and therefore neutralize their oxidizing effect? What are your thoughts?
I don't know. It is very hard to answer. We have this 40% of anionic iron that we can let's say up to we can remove. I think this should be investigated also for other solvents or metal solvent combination. And nevertheless, I think that we exactly find the same increase rate after. This tells us that's the story behind this. Even if we don't have understood it up to now, but it's really that we come to one status of oxidation or degradation in the solvent, and it seems that it's not the absolute concentration. So if there are scavengers perhaps available that we could use, might be there's perhaps the hope that we find something that will not damage the solvent, but reducing the catalytic effect. But there are quite a lot of equilibrium. We have topics like what is components normally not analyzed. So what's the sodium concentration, potassium concentration? All this is accumulating, and it has influence on the water shell surrounding also the ligand, and this exchange velocity between the molecules coming next to the metal or not. It's quite a lot of work that you have in front of you.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. And just a question, when you add solvent, is it the initial formula you use, or is it a different ratio when you add?
No, normally we had added the let's say the premix of the Caesar one salt, and I think we had two phases. I think for let's say 2/3 of the time we added this. You see differences in the degradation rate and also the emission rate between A and P and piperazine. And then we at one, I've forgotten one, but we will find it somewhere. Then we decided, okay, let's bring back the ratio to the original factor 2. But in the end, we don't see also any effect for this. It's the same with this. With the refills, when we dilute, the refills was always between 10 and 25% of the inventory that we added, and we could also expect when I dilute now the contaminants. Should we see something? But in the end, we have never found anything.
Yeah, I had a comment maybe the Brett's question about the oxidation of the iron when it's complexated. Like I can very easily imagine that that's possible because there are a lot of commercially available iron complexes with bidental ligands, especially hydrogen containing ones that are sold as oxidation catalysts. So I would see that.
You're saying you can imagine that they would render.
If the shuttle effect indeed exists, I don't see that as a problem if the iron is complexated.
Perhaps also for the colleague at the here at Teams meeting who asked regarding this, I think I mentioned it at the GHG16 conference. There are iron complexes used or there are processes available where you use iron complexes to remove hydrogen sulfide from gas. And there it's depending how the reactivity and the redox potential about, depending on the atoms that are connected to the iron, and normally it's nitrogen and oxygen, and it's not this simple. Also, it's normally 1, 3, or 2, 3, or 4 atoms connected to the iron. But with, I think you can really set the parameters and by the choice of the right ligand, how reactive this metal complex is. The problem is, yeah, we don't know it. Yeah, what? There are so many
There's like some tipping point between like lysine or EDA and EDTA. Because EDTA you would expect to be complex and maybe render the ions unavailable, right?
Yeah, so might shield them, as you suggested.
Yeah.
So
So maybe there's some point at which shielding takes place.
And yeah, we can say, but I think the results here caused quite a lot of discussion also in the project. But I think one has also published this data on dosing fly ash to solvent samples. Yeah, and it seems that it is not necessarily the truth that always the cleanest solvent has the lowest degradation rate. And Juliana has shown the wonderful results regarding the launch rate, but she has not shown the other very important result of the test, that we had some corrosion in the launch rig of some component and quite high iron, nickel, and especially copper concentrations. And what you can learn from the slides she has shown, yeah, there was no difference in the trend of the degradation, also not in the absolute levels. It's really the same behavior, but then the conclusion is, yeah, the metals have no impact. This is shocking, I know, but these are the results of the test, and that's the reason why we had this project launched.
Yeah. Hello, Hugo. You also had a question, right?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the nice presentation. I have a question. You had this active carbon A and B. Are they the same or different types?
Different types. So one is from pyrolysis of cocoa nuts, and the other is from thermal treatment. I think it's often of a coal.
Okay, thank you.
And don't choose active carbon B. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. B is the coconut?
Yeah, coconut is good, but it's very expensive. That's the disadvantage. Yeah, I think you have to pay, I don't know, 2,000 euro per ton. It makes a difference. Yeah, but I think it was cheaper if you have a good connection to the supplier. But I think it's also active. Also, we have quite a long time operated the unit without active carbon. So we can now start the discussion, is it really needed? Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because this is the cheapest solution.
Yeah. Okay. I think we should move on. So thanks a lot, Peter. It's my presentation and then the question. So the next presentation is on oxygen removal, and it's a presentation given by Roberta and Fred.
So as Peter explained, it will be a joint presentation together with Fred Plasman. At Delft, we investigated 2 different technologies to remove oxygen from the solvent to be able to control oxidative degradation. But first of all, I just want to give a brief introduction again about solvent degradation in general and the main possible causes of this. So above you can see that oxygen is flue gas. Other impurities, high temperatures, metals in solution, and particles in the flue gas can be causes of degradation of the solvent in general. We have been listening to this the whole afternoon now. And they can cause different effects, for example, higher emissions, some irreversible reactions that will lead to different degradation products that we cannot revert back to the previous solvent. This will create reduced solvent capacity, corrosion of the plants. You will have high costs and more liquidity solvent handling. I just want to stress that here we will look only on the issue of oxygen in the flue gas and what are the possible technologies now that we investigating in launch to be able to overcome this problem, or at least make it a little bit lower. So you heard today about the DOTA and about nitrogen sparging. So those are two different technologies that have some things in common and some things that are different. So DOTA is a membrane contactor. It has an indirect contact with the solvent, meaning that we do not add anything to the solvent and it goes through a membrane. And then we use a sweeping gas in combination with vacuum to be able to take the oxygen out of the solvent. And nitrogen sparging, it is a direct contact with the solvent because it's used while stripping gas is put through the solvent, and then the idea is that we'll take the oxygen out by the use of this nitrogen. Both of them at the moment are used after the sump. So the nitrogen sparging technology can be in the sump itself or in a separate vessel. And Fred will give more information about this in a bit. But we are investigating other possibilities of configuration of these technologies in the plant. So we both use nitrogen as a stripping gas or sweeping gas. The idea is to decrease the degradation products and retard this oxidative degradation, and also to increase the quality of the CO2. Because this oxygen that is in the solvent, even though your solvent degrades slower, this oxygen will still be in the solvent. And we will end up in a CO2 product because it will be stripped out in the stripping problem. And the idea is to show that these two technologies do not work only for solvents that degrade fast. They're actually very representative for solvents that do not degrade that fast in terms of the CO2 quality that you will get after this. So if we take a look at the DOTA, DOTA stands for Distilled Oxygen Removal Apparatus. And as I explained before, it is a membrane. So we have been working with two different membranes. So the one on the left is a commercial liquid cell membrane, and it's now at TRL7 actually. So in launch, it was brought to TRL6, and in another project was brought to TRL7. And as I explained before, we use the solvent through the membrane, and then we use sweeping gas, so nitrogen, and also vacuum to reduce the amount of nitrogen that is used. And the idea was actually to choose between two different membranes during launch. Which ones should we use in this project? And the reason why we chose to work with two different membranes is that the porous membrane has some issues. We know already we can have pore wetting, and this can decrease the efficiency of the membrane. It also has leakages of the solvent to the gas phase, and this can be overcome by the use of a dense layer membrane. However, it is a bit more difficult to scale up this dense layer membrane at the moment. There are commercial membranes available. However, we still need to test the material compatibility of these membranes with the solvents that we're using. In this project, we tested three different solvents: MEA, Caesar1, and MDF-Piperazine. And I will mainly present here to you the results of the optimization of the nitrogen flow, because the most of the OPEX of the DOTA technology goes into the amount of nitrogen that we actually need to use. So the idea here was to find a way to decrease this nitrogen use. So if we take a look at this graph, very similar to the graph that Julian already presented today, is in our Odin apparatus. So we loaded with oxygen a solution of MEA, and with pure oxygen in this case, so we can actually see the decay of the MEA. So here you see a graph of the oxygen decay without the DOTA. So then we connect the DOTA to this setup, and then we pump around to be able to see if we can actually get a faster removal of this oxygen by using the DOTA. Using a flow of 25 liters per hour of nitrogen, we could actually see a very high decrease of the oxygen that went almost to zero. And this was already a very good result because we started at 100, then we could decrease it to 25, and then we decided to use vacuum. And when we did that, we managed to decrease it to 1 liter per hour. And this is quite, is a very low amount of nitrogen that we have to use. And the idea is to try to still go a little bit lower and to be able to prove this same flows in a scaled up implementation. And another thing that we did was, Julian also showed this before, the degradation network model. So this is to see, so these results that you're seeing here are from the model itself. They are not experimental results, but they show three different scenarios. The baseline, the DORA operated downstream of the sun, and the DORA operated upstream of the sun. We have never operated the DORA upstream of the sun, but if we take a look at these graphs, we see that it should be something that we should investigate. Because if we put it upstream of the sun, then the amount of degradation that we can control is much higher. And if we compare MEA and CSER1, in MEA, most of the degradation as shown here happens in the absorber packing, while if you see for CSER1, it happens in the absorber sump and in the cross heat exchanger. So over there on CSER1, the influence and the impact of the DORA is even greater than when compared to MEA. So that's why we say that the idea is to prove that when we use the DORA with different solvents, different flue gas sources, we will have impact independently of the solvent being fast or slow in terms of degradation. So now I'll give the word to Fred.
So we, at University of Texas, have been investigating the use of nitrogen sparging for removal of dissolved oxygen in the absorber sump, or perhaps in a separate vessel on a full-scale application. I'll talk about a bit of that. It's proposed for stripping dissolved oxygen from the solvent before it's transferred to the hot side or high temperature side of the overall absorption stripping process. In the laboratory, we found that nitrogen sparging achieved greater than 90% DO removal. We found that nitrogen sparging achieved greater than 50% reduction in degradation as measured in liquid samples in solvents as evidenced by formate production, as well as in the gas phase and the headspace of a cycling reactor we have as ammonia. The absorber sump sparging at our 2022 SRP campaign demonstrated approximately 90% reduction in the DO concentration downstream of the absorber sump when we implemented sparging in the absorber sump. And this technology or approach for oxidation mitigation is currently being tested at NCCC in Wilsonville, Alabama. This is just a quick visual or pictorial overview of what we did at the SRP. This is the plant, the SRP or Separations Research Program plant at the University of Texas. I'll just come over to the picture on the right. This is our actual absorber open, and we're looking downward into the absorber sump as we made our modifications for our campaign in the fall of 2021 to get ready for that campaign. We placed in the bottom of the absorber a wire mesh mist eliminator. You can see that actually installed in the absorber sump before we put it back together. The idea here is the solvent collects in the absorber sump. You have nominally somewhere between, say, 24 and 32 inches of liquid height in that absorber sump. As the liquid flows downward and train gas bubbles coalesce on that demister element, form larger bubbles, and they're actually able to escape the solvent. So this is in effect a way of removing entrained gas or separate phase oxygen from the solvent before it's pumped to the hot side of the process. We also installed an off-the-shelf sparging pipe in the absorber sump just above this mist eliminator. That was to sparge nitrogen gas in the absorber sump as a step change during the latter part of the campaign. This is a plot of the dissolved oxygen concentration parts per million versus sparging time in minutes. You'll note it says 0 here. That time 0 is actually well into the campaign. I want to say it was maybe 300 or 400 hours into the campaign. It was a total of 1,000-hour campaign. But we wanted to do this on a degraded solvent. So at some point, somewhere in the middle of the campaign, we turned on the nitrogen to start sparging nitrogen gas in the absorber sump. The dissolved oxygen concentration fairly quickly was reduced to less than or equal to 1 ppm. When we increased the absorber sump level at one point, just in a short-term step change, We took inventory from the stripper sump, moved it to the absorber sump, increased the height. We got increased in mass transfer or stripping mass transfer, and we saw that dissolved oxygen concentration go down just a bit more. This, in essence, proved to us that the liquid height in the absorber sump or the liquid height in a separate vessel with the application of this technology has an effect on how much dissolved oxygen you're going to be able to strip. We wanted to look at a full-scale application, for example, not in an absorber sump. We used our Mustang feed project that we completed last year as a sort of a basis, but we first had to develop a model for stripping dissolved oxygen in the liquid continuous phase. It was modeled or developed to estimate DO stripping in a separate vessel, assume mass transfer with a straight equilibrium line. The mass transfer coefficient and liquid holdup correlations were taken from literature. We used Henry's law to estimate the incoming DO concentration, and we modeled tank diameter and height as a function of the nitrogen gas rate at a fixed DO removal. So we could say, what's it going to take? What size vessel will it take to achieve 90% removal of dissolved oxygen? When we did this, applying it to our Mustang feed, what I've done here is you can see everything in black is just a depiction of the Mustang feed absorber design. This doesn't have the full process flow sheet on it. The absorber dimensions in this case were 12 meters by 14 by 33. So we had a rectangular, very large absorber for each of the absorbers for our two capture trains. Everything in blue are the new unit operations required to do this evaluation of nitrogen stripping in a separate, stripping with nitrogen of dissolved oxygen in a separate tank. And when we did that and applied a lot of other details, which I'm not presenting here today in terms of the economic analysis, we did a present worth analysis and found that the base case is actually going to be cheaper to implement than the nitrogen sparging case. It's actually somewhere around 36 million versus 38 million. So it's a bit of a wash, but the bottom line is doing this straightforward analysis, we found that you're not going to get an economic benefit with what we know right now. So with what we know right now, it leads me into the next part of this, which is in talking about the two different technologies with Roberta Dora and nitrogen sparging, there are quite a few similarities. Nitrogen consumption being a primary OpEx component to the analysis. We wanted to look at some of the data gaps. Long and stable operation was one thing that we simply don't have. We ran about a week-long step change test at the SRP. At NCCC, we're going to run this for about 5 weeks steady, and we're going to look and see in the liquid phase samples as well as in the gas phase sampling that's conducted during the campaign, true effects to degradation rates. This is in addition to watching the DO get stripped out through a DO sensor downstream of the absorber sump. Very fun. And then CO2 purity data, how much oxygen will we have in the CO2 that is basically recovered from the carbon capture process at NCCC. We have a trace oxygen analyzer that's been installed at NCCC, and we have reason to believe, based on some preliminary tests in December, that this analyzer is going to give us good data in that regard. Nitrogen optimization, once again, I think Roberta mentioned that with DORA, the key OpEx component is nitrogen consumption, or an important component. Obviously, it's the same thing for nitrogen sparging in our sparging application. On the DORA side, demonstrated DORA's versatility with different solvents and different flue gases. In other words, it's compatible with different solvents. Is the membrane resilient in that environment? And is it effective with different flue gas compositions? Improved material compatibility, I think, is just kind of comes out of that concept. Nitrogen sparging, So when we went into developing a model and then doing our analysis of the sparging concept from an economic standpoint, it was really important that there were a lot of data available for nitrogen sparging in water, in the liquid continuous phase in water, but not necessarily in amine solvent. This represents a pretty significant data gap or knowledge gap for us. We'd like to minimize the sparge rate. And then finally, we'd like to understand, in our case, the effect of foaming. We know, and I didn't actually go into those data, but we know that during the period of time at the SRP campaign, when we sparged with nitrogen gas, we developed foam in the absorber sump. It was easily dealt with anti-foam agent. It actually really just represents a sort of operational hazard for the staff that are operating the plant. They'd like to be able to have good knowledge and control of absorber sump liquid level, and the foaming kind of inhibits that. So we'd like to know the long-term effects of nitrogen sparging in terms of foaming. And this is your acknowledgement slides, and that's really it from Roberta and I. If you guys have any questions for it, fire away.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Roberta. Any questions? Yes, Stefani again.
Yeah, thank you so much. Maybe two questions, one comment. The first question, right now, so probably you don't have any estimation of what is the impact on the cost, like how much this idea is going to increase the capex and opex, and how much trade-off we are going to have by saving the solvent, but adding this. So it looks like those are the information that are coming, and you don't have that information now. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have some of this information as part of the next presentation, I believe. And we also, to have the full picture, we do need some extra tests at a full scale, and then we can have more information on the scaling up of the membranes, of course. And I think it's the same for the nitrogen sparging to understand more information on the capex actually.
Okay.
Can I add to that?
Yes, please.
So one of the things that we came to understand last fall when we were doing the economic analysis on nitrogen sparging is that you're going to have benefits to the process in terms of reduced oxidation. That's the idea. And what does that translate to? Perhaps lower reclamation rate. You're going to reduce your reclaiming component to the overall process. And one of the data gaps, this is a very important data gap, is that there is a lack of good understanding about how reclaiming would be applied to one of these processes and how you would be able to reduce your reclaiming with one of these technologies. So your benefit is to reduce reclaiming just on a zero order basis. If you think about it very simply or simplistically, you can reduce reclaiming, you can reduce the cost, your OpEx. We had to pull some assumptions out of the air in order to do our economic analysis about reclaiming. So this is a data gap that we aren't necessarily going to fill just from implementing this as a test at NCCC. We will understand better the effectiveness of nitrogen sparging on degradation, but that won't lead us to understanding some of these things about reclaiming.
Perfect. If you go back to your slide 15, the lineup that you are presenting for sparging the nitrogen in the system.
This one?
15, 15.
I don't see a number.
Two more as well. It's 13.
Oh,
the other way, all the way up. Yeah. This one.
Yeah. Right. So this modified outline you're suggesting, well, looks, I think, probably looks more interesting than just sparging nitrogen in the absorber. So my dogs are also contributing to the relationship. Sorry about that. But this system that you have, basically you are using a bubble column here, a simple design bubble column. My comment is that maybe it's better instead of bubble column using some kind of agitated tanks. So agitated tanks are very common in gas liquid systems, and basically you can reduce your residence time by order of magnitude. Of course, you add a bit of complexity to your design, but I think it's going to reduce your nitrogen consumption. It's going to reduce the size of this system, and probably there will be also a trade-off there. So maybe a good thing to look into it during your TEA, techno-economic assessment on this concept. If you need more information on that, I can maybe connect with you and help you with that. But between bubble column, the simple design and agitated tanks, usually agitated tanks are very, very common.
Okay. I'm sorry, is there a question there? Or just
No, I just comment. I just a suggestion for you.
Okay, thank
So
you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks. Any other questions? If not, then thanks a lot. Well done, Fred.
Okay.
And then we move on to the presentation of the economics from Angus. Angus, are you online?
Hi, Peter. Yes. Yep. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody.
I did so.
Sure, where we are. Okay, so yeah, this presentation is on the following on from what we've just heard around controlling degradation and potential novel methods. This is cost estimation, so really in relation to Jafari's questions and comments there, then this might go some way to answer some of those questions, but by all means, do regard this as order of magnitude cost estimating at this time. So the cost estimation piece, we're looking to perform techno-economic analysis, looking at some. Hi guys, can you hear me? Yep, so we're looking to do various solvent degradation management options coming from the project itself, and to compare those against what are regarded as benchmark controls. So you either do nothing and regularly replace the solvent and accept the waste, you bleed and feed, make use of a thermal reclaimer or ion exchange system. And from that, obviously, determine which of those options is the most cost effective, or indeed if there's a combination of options that could be preferred. So the first part of any techno-economic evaluation is really setting the baselines that we're going to study. So this is really anybody that's aware of the Align project that preceded launch. We've carried forward with the pulverized coal and energy from waste plant references that were used in that study, and we've added a gas turbine plant on there as well, with particularly interest for the UK and the US at the moment. So I guess those references were chosen partly for that continuation effort. So we've got direct comparison in that we retained the economic parameters costings as they were for the first couple of cases, but partly also that we wanted to explore a complete range of full-scale plants. So we've got different scales, we've got different oxygen and CO2 levels. We're looking at 2 different solvents, and we're looking at different capture rates and some different availabilities in there as well. So with those in mind, we then wanted to look at, okay, what in addition to those benchmark technologies, which we could regard as corrective type techniques, what advanced technologies or techniques coming out of the launch projects could we apply to the techno-economics? So you can see there's a list of 4 or 5 there. I've highlighted the 2 that have just been spoken about by Roberta and Fred, the DORA and nitrogen sparging. So we've got some positive test findings there, and I think sufficient. Their techniques are, especially DORA, sufficiently developed to then look at that as a scale-up option. Possibly less so for nitrogen sparging, as just been talked about. We did have ambitions to include NOx, the reduction of NO2, also to look at the effect of non-metallic materials of construction, but unfortunately, the various problems or ambiguous results, and unable to gather sufficient data to then include that in any form here. So ultimately, what we're looking at is, we've got those more conventional techniques, and we're also looking at how do we reduce the oxidative degradation either through DORA upstream of the sump or downstream of the sump, or through nitrogen sparging. So the methodology that we applied, and we're looking at an initial clean solvent inventory, degradation of that inventory over time to a certain point, a threshold where the inventory either needs to be replaced or treated. So that degradation rate effectively includes for the ongoing solvent degradation, and the threshold then bears some relation to the emission element as well. So that made use of the degradation network model that we heard about earlier in the day, that TNO have developed for MEA and CESAR 1. We've then looking at taking the oxidative rate, factoring that up, or breaking that down to heat stable salts, addition of thermal or proportion rather as thermal degradation, and then from that total degradation, obviously that can be reduced by DORA or nitrogen sparge. And so yeah, the benchmark options are obviously trying to avoid that complete replacement of solvent when it becomes used. So there's a process flow down the bottom here. I don't want to spend too much time on this. We could possibly come back to this, but suffice to say there are certain parameters there that can be effectively used to tune the baseline degradation rate before the model is then applied to other plant, and ultimately this is really at best a class 5 estimate. It's a high level order of magnitude impact on the capex and the annual opex. So the other thing that we did here as well was to go down the route of making this a software tool. The main reason for that was the sheer quantity of the input required, and also the matrix of cases that we wanted to look at for each of the plant. So yeah, that this web application will give partners the ability to to set up and run their own cases. Okay, so looking at the results themselves, we'd calibrated the degradation network model to the RWE pilot plant for the two solvents, and for MEA that was the start of exponential degradation. As we heard from Peter, that point hasn't been reached yet for CESAR 1, so I guess we've applied a conservative estimate for the life of CESAR 1. But you can see from this graph here, we've got the free pulverized coal cases on the left. We've got the 2 energy from waste, and then the gas plant. So those are the oxygen levels that are shown in the white font there. So you can see the impact of the higher oxygen level on degradation rate. Higher degradation rate then means a shorter time until you have to either replace or treat your solvent inventory, which is the bars in yellow there. We also have the effects that Roberta was talking about earlier, and Juliana, in terms of the proportion of degradation that's occurring in the absorber in the blue, and the sump shown in the orange there. So higher amount of degradation that happens in the sump, and therefore an opportunity to target that using the likes of DORA or nitrogen sparging. Okay. In terms of the timescales, yeah, there's very highly variable, as you might expect from those rates. So you could have 12 months or more on the coal plant, but then only a couple of months on the other plant as a baseline run. So if we look to the OPEX and the breakdown of the OPEX across the individual techniques, so you've either got the baseline, these are really the benchmarks, the first three, and then the advanced techniques, the second half there. Bleed and feed you'll see is the same as the baseline. That's really an optimum continuous bleed and feed rate. So there are savings potentially to be had with bleed and feed if you allow a certain degradation of the solvent in the earlier period of running. But I think the highlight here is really, okay, there isn't a lot to choose for MEA, but you can see it more clearly for CSER1, where the solvent costs really start to dominate the advantage of reclaim and ion exchange, at least in terms of OPEX, but obviously very high CAPEX associated with reclaim. And you can see the relative differences I've mentioned between CSER1 and MEA. Nitrogen costs has just been talked about in the previous presentation. Obviously, they're contributing quite a lot to both DORA and nitrogen sparging in its current incarnation. So looking at that over the life of the plant, this is just one example for the PC plant on CSER1. We can see that in that case, thermal reclaim or ion exchange would be beneficial to the process. We're also starting to see potential advantage of DORA upstream, but that would rely on some more process optimization and some economies of scale. What I would say is that reduction in oxidation that we're getting from those techniques, combined with their cost, looking again at the data, it doesn't really justify a combination of preventative and corrective measures. The costs would just be too high in most cases. And we've also studied an increased capture rate as well. So relatively, there are some savings, OPEX savings to be had as we go to higher capture rates. Okay, so that's a whistle-stop tour of the techno-economics, but happy to take some questions.
Yeah, thanks, Angus. Are there any questions from the audience or?
I can ask a question on the reclaimer, Angus, maybe. Is the solvent cost also considered in the reclaiming due to the solvent loss by the technology? Just because I don't know if is this a small part there related to solvent, or is it related to heat? I cannot really see in the reclaiming.
Yeah, the majority of it is actually the fixed OPEX relating to the CAPEX outlay, and then there's a solvent, obviously caustic cost and waste cost. Hello? You hear me okay?
I can hear you.
I can hear you, but I don't think they can hear us. But we can't hear them, so we can talk.
No.
Maybe it's something there, or.
Do you hear us?
No, probably not.
Weird. Can you hear us, guys?
Yep.
Yeah? Okay.
We need to be like very close.
Lee, can you repeat your question?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you do the good solvent management, can you decrease the capital cost? If yes, how much?
Oh, sorry, the cost of CO2 capture in terms of.
Yeah, the capital cost.
I guess the euros per ton of CO2 capture.
Euro per ton, yeah, yep, yes, yep. We will include that in the report, yes. Yep. So I've not shown it here. I've just shown really the highlights as we're processing the data. But yes, we'll be calculating the euro per ton cost relative to what was shown previously in the Align project.
I wanted to just jump in and point out that it's always been my opinion that solvent degradation is not about cost. Solvent degradation is about the risk of environmental impact. And it's nice to know how much it costs. And it's nice to know it's not going to cost us a fortune, but we're not trying to make the total cost go down by not losing as much solvent. The issue here is not how much money we spend on the solvent. It's, geez, if this solvent degrades and we don't know how much degradation we're going to get, and somebody slaps some standards on us, we're in a big risk situation if we don't deal with these issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore, if it costs us twice as, if it adds cost to the process in order to do some of this mitigation stuff, it's worth it to minimize the risk.
Okay. Okay. Agree.
Thanks.
Can be both, with environmental benefit and meanwhile also have decrease in the cost.
Yeah.
Why not?
Any other questions? No? Okay. Then I would like to ask Julian to give a short reflection on the project as our, I know, to keep it to space terms, chief engineer of launch.
We go there. I think it's for the microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's thanks, Peter, for giving me the floor to discuss a little bit or close a little bit the discussions for launch, actually, this being our last meeting. I think it's well, before I actually go into that, just are there any points or questions online and so on? So I would like to also raise a question to the people online, like we've done in this 3.5 years a lot on degradation, at least so that's how I feel about it. But have we missed something that you think would be particularly nice and relevant and we haven't really touched on? Is there something that you think was a gap in this project?
You can also put it in the chat if you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, Farid?
Yeah, I have one question. As Dr. Rochelle said, degradation is not about cost, it's about environment and degradation products. And my question is that there has been a significant amount of work in this program, understanding the different pathways of a degradation, but mostly with generic amines, MEA, Caesar, piperazine, and other stuff. And how we can consolidate this information and relate it to the proprietary amines. Like, of course, you can categorize, you can say, this is the same pattern for linear amines, this is the same pattern for cyclic amines, but again, different chemical, different animal. So how this consolidation can be done, how it can give us a kind of a clear pathway that focus on this specific mitigation concept for this specific like group of chemicals.
I'm very unsure if we can ever get to something like that, because it's a big generalization, of course, and to be able to get to that point, I think then we would have to test much more to see if we can get to that type of generalization. Of course, I mean, if we look into what we have now for MEA, and we want to claim that okay, that's what happens with primary amines, I think that's a big leap. And therefore, like how then to apply this knowledge and to commercial solvents or proprietary solvents, put it this way. I would then argue that it's not really for us. What we are trying to do here is to come up with methodologies and techniques that we can apply to open solvents and then get to conclusions based on that, and that we hope that the markets can apply to the proprietary solvents when they see fit, to try to get to conclusions in the same lines that we're concluding here. That with that we hope to be helping the market for the existing and to be developed solvents, improving specific qualities and then facilitating permit processes and de-risking full-scale application. But to be able to use what we have now and really generalize, I think that would be too big of a leap.
I would second what Juliana has said. So the methods that are being developed or have been developed, we have 2 or 3 new methods as a consequence of this activity that can be in the toolbox, and we would hope that the proprietary amine developers will take those methods and either use them internally or hire one of us to do it for you. And another point is if there are users out there who are getting ready to commit to solvents, they can look at what we've done and they can go to the proprietary folks and say, hey, have you run this test yet? And what are your results with this test? Is it going to oxidize at our conditions or not? And unfortunately, maybe that puts a little more pressure on our proprietary sponsors to do things they might not otherwise choose to do. But it also means that the users of these things can be more intelligent about asking the right questions when it comes to selecting amine systems.
Thanks, Gary.
And I would specifically highlight the dissolved oxygen methods that TNO started and we followed up with represents a nice clean method for looking at that mechanism. And we're looking at these NO2 effects, and I think different amines will have different NO2 effects. And we've identified things that people need to be looking for. So,
any other points or questions to be raised? That doesn't look like that. So yeah, well, thanks everyone online and here also for the nice discussions in this meeting, and for all the partners for the discussions along the 3 years lead.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you tell me what we here as a group will say 3 things we cheerful for that? We think it's excellent. We are very happy with that. And tell me what the 3 things here.
Yeah.
And tell me also 3 things, what will be the challenge? What will have to do more and to really to get to the industry line the capture and really can implement that as quickly as possible.
Yeah. So I'll try to pick. So I think one of the things that we really have to highlight is the long-term CISA-1 campaign. I think that's really like we were really lucky and grateful to have the opportunity to work with that campaign for such a long time. That really allowed for a lot of data. It's the longest campaign, the longest open campaign ever, not only for CISA1, but it beat also the MEA campaign in RWE, and I'm still amazed that it ran for this long with such a clean solvent after all. So I think that's a big highlight, and I think that's something that all of us should be quite fearful for. The second thing, and I think it's something to add to thank ACT for, is that we had the possibility to form a group that is transatlantic, as the speaker likes to say. So it was really nice to have the opportunity to work with the US in this. It added a lot of knowledge to the project, but also a lot of knowledge into another solvent system, the active piperazine system that has been over a lot of years researched quite a lot by Gary's group. I think having the opportunity to work along with them during this 3 years and exchanging a lot of information and know-how was also a big highlight. And with the consequences of what, for instance, Gary highlighted, that, okay, well, we maybe develop a methodology, they pick it up and then continue using and so on. So this kind of collaboration that we are normally used to having maybe on European level, it's really nice that we can have it on a more global level, I'd like to say. So please keep on going with this kind of more global programs. And yeah, really hard to pick things. But I think if we put it all together, also from the launch rigs, the total runtime that we have at many different conditions, and something I would also like to highlight, that I think it really helps us understand consequences of trying to accelerate degradation. And it was a big sobering element also for us, because when we were putting this project together, we really thought that, okay, we throw a lot of oxygen in there, we increase the temperature, and then we can lower degradation or accelerate degradation so much to the extent that we can really lower the test time of the degradation of solvents and so on. And I think this is one of the things that we learned, that, okay, it's not as easy. So although solvent degrades, MEA particularly degrades relatively fast, it's accelerating it in a way that is also very representative and so on, and shortening times to 1-2 months that we had in mind is really something that is not as simple as we thought about. And I think we have gathered sufficient data to understand how to properly do this, and then allowing extra time for the degradation, I think, is really the way. Then the thing that we still need to do, again, hard to pick, it's a lot. So, but I think keep on going with the tests. So we've developed methodologies, and I think then use those methodologies with the solvents that we've tested to generate more data, but also with novel solvents. There's the category of third generation solvents that we had in the project with relatively, we paid relatively little attention to it, I would say. I think with good cause, because what we see being implemented now in the market is more in the direction of first and second generation. So that's where most of the attention should be. But if we look at the solvents that are out there now, and I'm not saying that, okay, then we definitely need to go to third generation, but if we look at the solvents that are out there now, I think for every solvent, open solvent that we know of, we can list a few drawbacks. So I think that brings, gives room for improvement. And then then we should keep on working on that and trying to improve solvent formulation so that we have fewer drawbacks for the solvents to be implemented in the market. And then using the methodologies that we've developed here would be really nice. We should do more tests in general and with different flue gases. And yeah, I mean, varying a lot of this is so. For instance, now we have the network degradation model, but I mean, figuring out how to come up with experiments to properly validate what we're finding in there and tune things and so on, that will be really interesting. I think this would be a included list. But yeah, I think those are main highlights. I think. Yeah, I don't know if anyone would like also to add to this list.
Yeah, as a few famous words, I think. So also I'd like to thank everybody also online. We had more than 40 people, so that's really great, I think. I hope it was interesting for you. And also thanks for all the questions. Yeah, I think I totally agree with Juliana about the highlights. There were some drawbacks also, of course, COVID. We had a campaign in Asia that didn't work out that well. We had flooding impact, so we had quite some delays. But yeah, if you stay a bit into the aerospace terms, I think it was an interesting journey to outer space. To be there for 3.5 years working on this. I mean, was it a great journey? Yes, I think it was a great journey. Was it a difficult journey? Also, lots of discussions. Yeah, as I said, COVID, flooding, quite a few drawbacks. So, but I think we made it. We had a great crew, a good chief engineer, good superintendents, which are then the work package leaders, right? And a great crew to help us along this journey. So now we're back on Earth with the foot on Mother Earth. There's going to be a debriefing, of course, in the form of a lot of reports that everybody promised me yesterday that will be uploaded on the website. Will it be a second journey? I don't know, maybe. If people are interested in a second journey, let me know. Then we can see what we can make of it. If we can have a second journey, I think Juliana said, okay, there's still a lot to do. So maybe a second journey is in place to explore a bit more this outer space of degradation. If there are any questions from the people also online that are remaining or that you think when they're laying in bed, oh yeah, I should have asked this, then contact me. I can keep you in contact with the right person. And that's it. I want to thank everybody, of course. And I looked up some quotes out of the aerospace TV shows, and I think they're also applicable for lunch. So I want to end with that. So one is things are only impossible until they are not. And I think that's really worth it. If you keep on fighting, then you can get a long way. From Professor Spock or Spock, you know, the one with the ears. Insufficient facts always invite danger. I think that's probably very applicable for lunch. We should state the facts and mitigate the danger. And but you need the real facts and the real data to mitigate the danger. And the last one is live long and prosper. With that, so thanks everybody. Thanks for your participation online also. Hope it was interesting. And let me know if you have any comments or requests or recommendations for us. Then we will take that into account. So thanks a lot.